Slack is a platform for team communication that brings messages from people together with messages from the other tools that they use. So, for example, they might use Dropbox and Zendesk and GitHub and Twitter and Salesforce and a bunch of other tools to get their work done. And all of those things produce messages. All of the people are constantly sending each other messages, and Slack brings them all together into one place and makes them searchable and available on your phone everywhere you go. Slack is familiar to anyone who's used any kind of messaging application, which we're getting to the point now is everyone who has ever used the internet or used a smartphone at all. I guess the difference is messages aren't necessarily directed at other people, they're directed at channels. And a channel in Slack is a topic or a project or a group or a team. And those messages are available to people who join the channel after it started. So the channel exists whether you're a member or not, and it exists after you leave. So I guess the difference is when you've been working on a project for 6 months or 9 months or a year, and then you have someone new join the team, rather than starting with nothing, rather than starting with an empty inbox and no access to the archives, they start with everything, with every decision that's been made, every discussion that people have had, every document that's been shared, every link that's been posted, and that makes a huge difference in how easy it is for teams to work together. It's a standalone application, yeah, and then you integrate the other tools you use. So for example, in the Slack team's instance of Slack, we have every time someone tweets at us, that gets posted in. Every time a customer creates a new support ticket, that gets posted in. Anytime we create a bug, so tracking problems with our software, that automatically gets posted in. Every time a problem is reported with one of our technical systems, we use a tool called PagerDuty. PagerDuty will paste it in. Anytime we create a doc in Google Docs, for example, or upload a file to Dropbox and then share it with someone, it will get added to Slack as well and also become searchable. So we started the company 6 years ago to build a web-based massively multiplayer game, and we spent about 3.5, almost 4 years working on that. And it didn't work, and at the time it was very, it was crushing, not just because we had invested all this time and energy and money into it, but especially as the CEO and the person responsible for it, to have to tell a whole bunch of people that they lost their job all at the same time. It's not to undercut how horrible it is to lose your job, but to tell someone, to convince them to move to a new city with their family and take this job, and then 3 months later they don't have it. So that itself was crushing. Not being able to work on the game and having to work on Slack instead, that's no problem. I just like making software, and the whole team likes making software, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a game or a tool for business, as long as we feel like it has the same level of quality. I'm definitely able to learn some things from my mistakes, but I think ultimately it is still a process of trial and error, because you might think that you learned a lesson, but it's not just your actions that make a difference, it's the whole environment, and everything keeps evolving so quickly. I think one of the reasons that the game didn't work this time, and this is not the main reason, but one of the reasons is, at the time we got started, it wasn't as clear as it was even a year later how much of people's discretionary computing time was shifting to mobile. So now if you were thinking about starting a game, unless it's a console game, like a PlayStation or Xbox or something like that, you wouldn't dream of anything except for a mobile phone or an iPad or something like that. And we missed that by starting on it a little bit too early and investing in the wrong technologies. So, that condition changed. So if we just took robotically lessons that we learned in the past and tried to apply them with changing conditions, so you'd still probably fail. A lot of it is, you see there's a huge number of very successful businesses that are very much the same, and Slack is no really exception, to something that came 3 years or 5 years or even 10 years before, and the first thing was too early. It's almost as big of a problem for people to try something too early than too late. Well, I know the primary cause, which is people recommend it, which is as kind of the entrepreneur's dream, that your thing is so well loved that it gets recommended. As for why people recommend it, that's harder to say. I think there's so many factors. Again, timing I think is very important. We've also made a real effort to make it courteous software. So it should be as helpful and respectful of people's time as it can be, because people use Slack very intensively. They use it for hours and hours a day. And every little bit of friction that you can remove has a profound impact when you add up the hours and the weeks and the months that people use it. There are definitely security implications for using some centralized or cloud-based service for communication. We, as a company, invest very, very heavily in security and have a great security team. We also use third-party companies to evaluate our security practices, undergo regular audits. We have a bug bounty program, which means that there's hundreds of people around the world continually testing Slack and trying to find bugs. One of our first 50 hires was a vice president of policy and compliance strategy to help us work with customers and regulated industries to try to ensure that their standards of privacy are met. So in other words, we invest in a lot more. Now, there's definitely, if you are a technology company, you might be able to run your own service reliably. If you are a real estate company or a graphic design firm or a legal office, odds are that we will handle security better than you do. All traffic is encrypted both ways. We constantly monitoring updates in the security community, and as I mentioned, we have external security firms auditing our practices, but we also have external security firms that do what's called penetration testing, so to try to get inside of Slack systems. I have never regretted selling Flickr, and I know very well that had we waited another 6 months or maybe a year, we would have made 10 times as much money. But at the time, Flickr was the only thing. It was the first company in a span of like 4 to 5 years that had been any kind of success in the consumer internet. And so the context was very different than it is today. It also, ultimately we were disappointed with the kind of support that we got inside of Yahoo to continue to grow Flickr. But I couldn't have known that in advance, and so I try to avoid feeling regretful for things that I can avoid feeling regretful for, because it's not a very constructive feeling. I think we are at the beginning of like 100-year shift in how people communicate. So, I mean, that's especially relevant to us, but also the applications of this kind of technology. The very first engines that people ever invented. It was a long way from that moment to the locomotive and to the automobile and to the airplane and to electrification and then all the things that were dependent upon electrification, like computing technology and the telephone network and things like that. So there's this age we're in now of first computing technology and second networked computing especially. I think the potential for it is much bigger than we currently imagine, and in 100 years from now, or maybe 200 or 300 years, there will be things going on that would be as difficult for us to imagine as the modern world would have been for someone in the 17th century. So there's a lot of people here who I haven't seen in a long time, and it's nice to reconnect.